Hey guys, Chris from Drift Outfitters here, and today I want to show you how to tie a reverse Hoh Bo Spey fly. This is a really cool technique that sort of tweaks the classic Hoh Bo Spey and just gives you a fly with a little more profile. One thing about the Hoh Bo Spey you'll notice if you look at your classic kind of Hoh Bo Spey is that it's a very thin profile fly, and sometimes it does kind of slick out in faster flows. So this is a really cool and simple way of just adding a little more bulk to this awesome fly, making it fish a little better in fast water. Now what I've done here is, you'll notice this looks a little funny. I've taken my shank and actually this is the same shank that we used in our video on how to create a trailing wire loop. So if you haven't seen that, visit that video right now and take a quick peek on how we did that. But I've flipped around this shank in my vise jaws. So your standard orientation, be this way with that wire back. I've flipped it around so the eye of this shank is actually now in the jaws of my vise. And this will kind of put on a funny angle, so you have to rotate your vise slightly to have it sit straight, but that's not too hard to do. So I'm going to pop it in the jaws of my vise. You'll see with the wire loop where my hook will end up being in front of my tying surface. And the reason that we're doing that is because we're tying this fly backwards. So we're going to start tying at the head of the fly and end at the back, the reverse of a normal pattern. So I'm going to start off with what we usually do, obviously, to end the fly. This is some just black Marabou. You want to use a nice large plume. This is the Wapsi Select Marabou. You're looking for something with nice long barbs off the side, undamaged barbs, and a fairly thin stem that can be wrapped. So what I'm going to do here, and we've done a video on tying a popsicle spey before too. That's a great introduction on how to work with this stuff. But I'm going to, from the bottom of this stem here where it gets really thick, I'm going to strip the barbs off of this section of the stem because we're not going to be able to work with this. So I'm just grabbing the fibers off the side and pulling against the grain to strip that clear. And now I've got just the more sort of flexible part of the stem left here. I'm then going to just locate sort of the tip of this feather. So grabbing as close to the top of it as I can. And I'm just going to pull down to expose that tip section. I'm not trying to pull any fibers off. I'm just trying to clear space that I can tie it in by here. I'm going to take that tip and I'm going to tie it in at what is the eye, like so. And then I'm going to fold this tip back and tie it back just to make sure it's not going to slip out on me. Then you can just take your scissors, clip off that tip section. Now, we're going to start wrapping this Marabou. You can see I've taken my thread back to the back here just to get out of the way. This can be sort of a messy, tricky process. It's not too bad once you get a hang of it, but these fibers can be a little unruly. So if you want, you can wet these feathers, use a little water, something like that. But the process is you're going to start wrapping, and with every wrap, you're just trying to sort of pull the fibers back and out of the way so that they don't get trapped underneath each consecutive wrap. So take your time with this. This is, you know, the profile of the fly is essentially just this Marabou that we're wrapping. The rest is just going to be sort of complementary additions to the fly that will help this fish a little better, but this is the focal point of the fly, is this Marabou. So take your time, make sure you get it right. And you'll see I'm stroking the fibers back toward the eye as we go. That's important. This fly is frankly going to look pretty ugly about halfway through at least before it finally comes together. It's going to look quite strange compared to, you know, flies that we're used to seeing for the most part. So just sort of pulling back toward the eye, and you can see I'm getting toward the thick part of the stem. It's going to get really tough to wrap past here. That's why we stripped those fibers off. Just going to back my thread up to where that is now. Make a few wraps over that stem. Now this stem is, again, very thick at this point. It's quite stiff and slippery. So don't be afraid, pile on a few wraps of thread just to make sure that doesn't slip, because this stalk can get quite tough to work with at this point. Clip off the rest once we have that tied in snugly. Now we're going to start on the body. So we've got a few materials going on here. First thing that we're going to tie in, this is just some small silver wire, small, medium, large, you can work with just about any size. This is just going to help us reinforce this body a little bit. Just going to tie in length of that along the body here. Then I'm going to take a guinea feather. This is just a natural guinea here. You could also use a saddle hackle or something like that. Anything with stiffer barbs will work. I'm going to choose a fairly large feather here from the bundle. This one should do nicely. Something with some length that's really going to help us prop up this material. And now, you can tie this whole feather in if you want, hackle the entire thing, or you can just do one side. These feathers are pretty stiff, so even one side generally does the trick, but tying in the whole thing will give you even a little more profile if you really want it. So, because I'm working forward to back, I'm going to strip the opposite side that I usually would, which means that if you're looking at this feather, so you can see it's curved, if it's curving away from yourself, I'm going to be stripping the right-hand side of this feather. Like so, okay? So the left is left intact, and I'm also going to get rid of just this fluff at the base here. It's not of too much use to us. Just like so. Now I'm going to tie this in with that feather facing back toward the eye of the hook. That's a very stiff stem as well. It does tend to be a little slippery, so you want to make sure it's tied in really well. All right. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take some dubbing. In this case, this is a peacock black ice dubbing. Frankly, I don't think it's very important what you use for this particular stage. This will get brushed out into the fly a little bit, so it may show up slightly when the fly is wet. And a stiffer, longer barbed, or fibered rather, dubbing may increase the profile again, even just a little more, as it'll help prop things up. But I think it's a less important step here. This is more for ourselves and our own confidence. So I've dubbed a little bit on here, not a ton. I'm not going all the way back to the loop here, really just covering maybe a centimeter of shank here. And I'm just going to take my guinea. You can use hackle pliers if you want. I'm just going to start wrapping this so that the curvature of the barbs again sort of cups the marabou that we wrapped here. It's all flowing in that same direction back toward what will be the eye. I'm going to make 3 or 4 wraps here. Again, making sure I'm not trapping any fibers. Guinea's a pretty easy hackle to work with. Fairly forgiving, I find. I'm just going to tie that off once I get back to the loop at the back. Tie it down nice and tight. Snip off the tip. And now I'm going to wind that wire that we tied in through the guinea. That's going to help just reinforce that stem so that if a fish's tooth sort of nicks the stem, it's not going to break. And you'll see what I'm doing here is I'm just sort of pulling the fibers so that they stand up a little bit more. That'll help me weave that wire through the barbs, make sure that that's not trapping too many fibers. So I'm just going to take my wire now, if I can get free of the marabou, and just going to carefully start wrapping this throughout. If you trap a few barbs, it's not the end of the world. You just want to leave most of them free and intact here so that they can help the profile of this fly. This is all going to get covered up by marabou. This is just sort of the foundation for the fly. And again, to this point, it's really no different than a regular Hoh Bo Spey. It's just tied backwards. So wrap that through, just using the tips of my scissors. You can use a bodkin or your fingers, whatever you find most comfortable, to move those fibers out of the way as we go. And then when I get back here, I'm just going to wrap my thread around the wire and actually anchor it. So I'm wrapping backwards, the opposite direction as my regular thread wraps. And by doing this, I'm pulling the wire in the direction that it was wrapped, so I'm actually tightening it. Because I wrapped this wire backwards against the direction of the hackle and my tying thread, if I wrapped forwards, I would actually take a little bit of pressure off of my wire wraps and may loosen it up unintentionally. So I've reversed the direction of my tying thread here. I'm wrapping backwards. Now I'm just going to, once again, cross my thread and wire here and start wrapping in the normal way. Put a few more wraps over top of my previous reversed ones to make sure that that doesn't slip. And then I'm just going to take this wire and I'm going to wind it like so until it breaks. That'll give me a nice clean break-off point. And what I like to do is I like to add just a little hotspot to my hobos here. So this is some Senyo's fusion dub. This is the Eat a Peach color. Great names on this stuff. You can use STS dubbing or ice dubbing, wherever you like. I like a longer fiber dubbing that when I pick it out is going to trail back into the fly and remain visible even when this marabou gets brushed back. So it doesn't take a ton. This is a very short shank, or short section of shank that we're working with here. I just want to build a little bit of a dubbing ball at the back, a little more than that. You don't have to dub this too tightly. I'm going to pretty aggressively brush this out to try and free up these fibers a bit. So I'm just trying to get them on enough that they aren't going to pull out, but don't worry about making it too tight. And then at this point, I'm just going to throw on a whip finish at the very back here. Like so. Snip our thread. You can take a little bit of head cement here. If I can find my bodkin. We'll just cut this part out. And we'll just add a little bit of head cement. Careful not to cake it all over the dubbing here, but just sneak it in right behind that dubbing ball. Now what we can do, I'm going to flip this guy around and you'll see this fly sort of start to come together. I warned you it was not going to look good at this point. I'm just going to change the orientation of my vise here. You can see all those fibers are facing forward. They're all messy. This is sort of reminiscent at this point of a Japanese style of wet fly called what's called a kabari fly, which is sort of a reverse tied wet fly, gives you that forward profile and really stands things up in the currents. Same kind of concept here. I'm going to grab a just dubbing brush here, and I'm really going to kind of go to town on the body here. I don't want to be gentle with this. I want to sort of stress test this fly before it gets into a fish's mouth. Make sure nothing's going to come undone on me, but I'm also trying to really rough up the dubbing, get it incorporated into the fly. And that just aid in that sort of buggy profile that we want. Now, what we're going to do, we're going to start just pulling these fibers of the marabou back a little. And now you can start to see the profile taking shape. I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to reattach it in front of this fly. Up at the eye. And important to note, when you get up to the top here, I don't want to really wrap back over top of the marabou. There's a little gap in my marabou wrap here, so I'm going to cover that up a little. But I don't want to wrap over this marabou. The whole concept of this fly is that the marabou being wrapped in, encouraged to slope forwards, gives this fly profile. I don't want to ruin that by trampling it down with thread wraps. Now what I do want to do at this point is sort of ease these fibers back so I do get a nicer profile, something that I'm a little more confident fishing. What I'm going to do next, this is optional. I've got just a little bit of Flashabou here. Just going to take a couple strands. You can go as light or as heavy as you want. I like regular Flashabou for this purpose. You can use other things if you like. I'm going to take 2 strands. I've doubled them over my thread. I'm just going to tie them in on top of this fly. Like so, and I'm just going to trim them to be about the same length as my marabou here. All right. Now, the original Hoh Bo also has a little bit of Amherst mixed into the equation. That's this stuff right here. And this just adds a little variegation to the fly. You could say that maybe the stiffness of these fibers helps with the profile of the wing as well. But I've got 2 fibers that I've taken off of that stem here, and I'm going to tie them in. I'm just going to clip the butts here so I get a nice clean tie-in point, but I'm going to tie them in just on the top of the shank serve at the 2 o'clock position. I'm going to take another 2, like so, tie them in at, cut the butt ends rather, tie them in at 10 o'clock. Like so. Another 2 at 8. You can get the picture. Another 2 after that at 4. You could easily skip this step if you want, but it does add a nice look to the fly. So we've got our Amherst tied in here. We've got a little bit of flash mixed in, and I'm just going to finish this fly off with a little bit more Guinea. You can use the same color if you want. I've got some orange here. Just going to grab a decent sized feather. That one looks good to me. This time, looking at it the same way, I'm going to strip off the left side of this feather. I'm just going to tie this in instead of by the base, but by the tip. I always prefer tying hackles in by the tip if possible, just because it's a little easier to grab onto the stem of the feather instead of the tip. Snip off that tip section. And then I'm just going to put a few wraps in front here, and this adds a couple of things. 1, nice little bit of color to finish the fly, but then 2, it also adds a little bit more rigidity at the front. And so if you imagine if there's current pushing over this fly, this sort of dampens the effect of that current and creates almost like a little pocket, just like you'd have in a river behind it. So it creates a soft spot where that marabou can easily expand and flow freely and won't get pushed down right away. Build up a little bit of a head there, clean things up. And that is your reverse tied Hoh Bo Spey. Awesome fly, gives you tons of motion in the water. Give it a go.